Lieutenant Commander Rachel Hayes had been serving aboard the USS Hannigan for 8 months when she first noticed the way Commander Marcus Webb watched her every move. The massive aircraft carrier had been her home through 3 deployments, cutting through Pacific waters under gray skies that seemed to mirror the growing tension in the command structure. Rachel never sought attention. While other officers filled the wardroom with loud stories and forced laughter, she quietly reviewed flight schedules, double-checked maintenance logs, and ensured every detail of air operations ran smoothly. Her service record was flawless, her performance consistently outstanding, but she possessed something that made certain superior officers uncomfortable: the quiet confidence of someone who knew their job better than those giving the orders. The first warning sign came during a routine briefing in the ready room. Commander Webb stood at the front, his uniform crisp but his eyes cold as winter ocean. "Air operations will now require additional approval layers," he announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who enjoyed wielding power. "Every flight plan must cross my desk personally before execution." Rachel raised her hand respectfully. "Sir, that will create significant delays in our response times. Current protocols already ensure." "Did I ask for input, Lieutenant Commander?" Webb's voice cut through the room like a blade. "New regulations are not up for debate." The room fell silent. Rachel nodded once, maintaining her composure despite the public dismissal. But she caught the uncomfortable glances exchanged between other officers, the way Chief Petty Officer David Martinez shifted uneasily in his seat. Webb's new requirements made no tactical sense, served no operational purpose, and seemed designed primarily to assert dominance over a department that had been running flawlessly under Rachel's careful supervision. After the briefing, David approached her quietly. "Ma'am, that was unnecessary. Everyone knows you run the tightest air ops in the fleet." Rachel appreciated his support but kept her response professional. "We follow orders, Chief. That's what we do." But that night, alone in her quarters, Rachel stared at the ceiling and wondered why competence had become a liability. She had spent 12 years earning respect through excellence, protecting her people and ensuring mission success. Now she felt like a target in crosshairs she couldn't see. Webb's new procedures created chaos within days. Flight delays cascaded through the schedule, maintenance windows shortened dangerously, and pilot fatigue increased as operations stretched longer than necessary. Rachel worked 16-hour days trying to maintain safety standards while navigating the bureaucratic maze Webb had constructed around her department. The second warning came during a late-night equipment inspection. Rachel was reviewing avionics reports when Webb appeared in the hangar bay, his expression predatory in the harsh fluorescent lighting. "Working late again, Hayes?" His tone carried implications she didn't like. "Ensuring flight readiness, sir. The new approval process requires additional preparation time." Webb stepped closer, invading her personal space. "You know, some officers understand the importance of loyalty. Others seem to think they know better than their superiors." Rachel maintained eye contact, refusing to be intimidated. "I'm focused on mission success, sir. That's always been my priority." "Mission success," Webb repeated, his voice dripping with false concern. "Interesting perspective from someone who seems to question every decision I make." The conversation felt like a trap, each word carefully chosen to corner her. Rachel had encountered officers like Webb before, men who viewed competence as competition and mistook professionalism for defiance. She knew that any response would be twisted, any silence interpreted as admission of guilt. "I follow orders, sir," she said simply. Webb smiled, but it never reached his eyes. "We'll see about that, Lieutenant Commander. We'll see." As he walked away, Rachel felt the weight of impending disaster settling around her like fog. She had done nothing wrong, but in Webb's Navy, that might not matter. Excellence had become her enemy, and she was about to discover just how far some officers would go to eliminate threats to their authority. The storm was coming, and Rachel Hayes was standing directly in its path, armed with nothing but her integrity and the hope that truth would somehow be enough to weather what was about to unfold. The rumors started 3 weeks later, spreading through the ship like wildfire in dry timber. Rachel first heard whispers during morning chow, fragments of conversation that made her blood run cold. Someone in Air Ops compromised safety protocols, ... Deliberate violations, investigation ongoing, ... She found Chief Martinez in the avionics bay, his face grim as he pretended to focus on diagnostic equipment. "Chief, what's the word on the deck?" Martinez glanced around nervously before speaking in low tones. "Ma'am, someone's been feeding information to Commander Webb. Stories about shortcuts, safety violations, protocol bypasses, all pointing back to air operations." Rachel felt the deck shift beneath her feet, though she knew the carrier was steady. "What kind of stories?" "The kind that end careers," Martinez said quietly. "Ma'am, everyone who knows you knows it's garbage. But Webb's got the captain's ear, and he's painting a picture of negligence and insubordination." The pieces began falling into place. Webb's unnecessary approval requirements, the increased scrutiny, the late-night confrontations. He had been building a case against her, manufacturing evidence of incompetence where none existed. "Have you seen any actual documentation?" Rachel asked. Martinez shook his head. "That's the problem. It's all verbal reports, hearsay, and unofficial complaints. Nothing you can challenge directly, but enough to create doubt." Rachel spent the next day reviewing every decision she had made, every protocol she had followed, every report she had filed. Her record was spotless, her procedures textbook perfect, her safety ratings among the highest in the fleet. But she was learning that facts mattered less than perception, especially when someone with authority was determined to shape that perception. Lieutenant Jennifer Walsh, one of the younger officers in air operations, approached Rachel during evening duty. "Ma'am, I need to tell you something. Commander Webb called me into his office yesterday. He asked questions about your leadership style, your decision-making process, whether you ever bent rules or took shortcuts." Rachel's heart sank. "What did you tell him?" "The truth. That you're the most thorough officer I've ever served under. That you've never compromised safety or cut corners." Jennifer's voice trembled slightly, but he kept pushing, suggesting that maybe I hadn't noticed things, that perhaps I was being too loyal to see problems. The systematic nature of Webb's campaign became clear. He was interviewing her subordinates, planting seeds of doubt, creating a narrative of negligence that would justify whatever action he planned to take. That night, Rachel called her mentor, Captain Patricia Reynolds, who had transferred to Norfolk 6 months earlier. The conversation was brief but illuminating. "Rachel, be careful," Patricia warned. "Webb has a reputation for eliminating officers he perceives as threats. He's methodical, patient, and ruthless. If he's targeting you, it's because he sees something in you that threatens his authority." "But I've done nothing wrong, Captain. My record is clean." "That's exactly the problem," Patricia said sadly. "Excellence makes insecure officers nervous. They'd rather have mediocrity they can control than excellence they can't." The next morning brought the first formal accusation. Rachel was summoned to Webb's office, where he sat behind his desk with a file folder and a satisfied expression. "Lieutenant Commander Hayes, I've received concerning reports about your management of air operations. Multiple sources indicate you've been bypassing safety protocols to meet unrealistic schedules." Rachel maintained her composure. "Sir, I'd like to review those reports and provide documentation of my adherence to all safety requirements." Webb's smile was cold. "This isn't a negotiation, Hayes. It's a notification. You're being placed under administrative review pending a full investigation. The words hit like physical blows. Administrative review meant suspension from duties, isolation from her people, and a black mark that would follow her regardless of the outcome. Sir, I request the opportunity to present evidence in my defense. You'll have that opportunity through proper channels, Webb replied dismissively. Until then, you're restricted to quarters, except for meals and mandatory briefings. As Rachel left Webb's office, she felt the weight of injustice settling on her shoulders. She had served with distinction for 12 years, protected countless lives, and earned the respect of peers throughout the fleet. Now she was being destroyed by lies and innuendo, her career hanging by threads that Webb was systematically cutting. But as she walked through the ship's corridors, Rachel noticed something that gave her hope. The looks from crew members weren't judgmental or suspicious. They were sympathetic, angry, and supportive. Chief Martinez nodded respectfully as she passed. Lieutenant Walsh offered a subtle thumbs up. Even sailors who barely knew her seemed to understand that something unfair was happening. Webb might have the authority to destroy her career, but he couldn't erase the relationship she had built or the respect she had earned. The storm was intensifying, but Rachel Hayes was not facing it alone. The investigation was a sham from the beginning. Rachel sat in a sterile conference room while Webb presented his case to Captain Thomas Harrison, the ship's commanding officer. The evidence was circumstantial, the witnesses coached, and the conclusions predetermined. Lieutenant Commander Hayes consistently ignored safety protocols to meet operational deadlines, Webb declared, his voice carrying false authority. Multiple personnel have reported concerns about her leadership style and decision-making process. Rachel listened to her character being systematically destroyed by carefully crafted lies. Every decision she had made was twisted. Every protocol she had followed was reinterpreted as negligence. Every success was dismissed as luck rather than competence. "Permission to respond, sir?" Rachel asked Captain Harrison. Harrison, a man she had respected for his fairness, barely looked at her. "The investigation is ongoing, Lieutenant Commander. You will have opportunity to provide input through proper channels." The dismissal stung worse than Webb's accusations. Harrison had seen her work, had commended her performance, had relied on her expertise during critical operations. Now he was treating her like a stranger, a problem to be solved rather than an officer to be protected. After the meeting, Rachel returned to her quarters to find her personal effects being searched by Master-at-Arms personnel. Her computer had been confiscated, her files examined, her privacy violated in service of Webb's vendetta. Chief Martinez found her there an hour later, his face angry and frustrated. "Ma'am, this is wrong. Everyone knows it's wrong." The crew was talking about filing a complaint with the Inspector General. Rachel shook her head. "Chief, I appreciate the loyalty, but I won't have good people destroying their careers for me. Webb is too well connected, too powerful. But ma'am, you're the best officer on this ship. You've saved lives, prevented accidents, trained half the air operations personnel in the fleet. How can they do this to you?" Rachel looked out the porthole at the endless gray ocean. "Because competence threatens incompetence, Chief. Because some officers would rather eliminate excellence than be challenged by it." The final blow came 3 days later. Rachel was ordered to appear before Captain Harrison for what Webb called a career counseling session. The meeting was brief, brutal, and final. "Lieutenant Commander Hayes, the investigation has revealed serious concerns about your fitness for command," Harrison announced, his voice devoid of emotion. "Effective immediately, you're being transferred off this ship at the next supply rendezvous." Rachel felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "Sir, I request a formal court-martial. I want the opportunity to defend myself with evidence and witnesses." "That won't be necessary," Webb interjected smoothly. The Navy doesn't need the embarrassment of a public trial. Accept the transfer gracefully, and your service record will remain officially clean. The threat was clear: accept exile or face total destruction. Rachel realized she was trapped in a system designed to protect officers like Webb while sacrificing officers like herself. "When do I leave?" she asked quietly. "Tomorrow morning," Harrison replied. "Pack your personal effects. A boat will transfer you to the supply vessel." That night, Rachel sat in her quarters writing letters she would never send. Letters to junior officers who deserved better leadership. Letters to chiefs who had trusted her judgment. Letters to a system that had failed to protect integrity while rewarding corruption. She thought about fighting back, about making noise, about refusing to go quietly. But she also thought about the young officers who looked up to her, the enlisted personnel, who depended on her example, the principles she had sworn to uphold. Sometimes dignity meant accepting injustice with grace, maintaining honor even when honor wasn't rewarded. Sometimes the most powerful protest was refusing to let corruption change who you were. Rachel Hayes would leave the USS Hannigan with her, integrity intact, her conscience clear, and her head held high. Webb had won this battle, but he hadn't broken her spirit. As she packed her single duffel bag, Rachel didn't know that her quiet dignity was about to inspire something unprecedented in naval history. She didn't know that her walk across that deck would become a moment that defined the difference between authority and respect, between command and leadership. She simply prepared to leave with the same professionalism that had defined her entire career, unaware that the ocean itself was about to bear witness to her character. The morning of Rachel's departure dawned gray and cold, with whitecaps breaking across the Pacific swells. She dressed in her full dress uniform, every detail perfect despite the circumstances. Her cover sat precisely positioned, her ribbons aligned flawlessly, her bearing military straight despite the weight of injustice on her shoulders. Word had spread throughout the ship during the night. Sailors lined the corridors as she walked toward the flight deck, their faces grim with understanding. Chief Martinez stood at attention as she passed, his salute crisp and defiant. Lieutenant Walsh fought back tears, her hand trembling as she brought it to her brow. "They're making a mistake, ma'am," whispered Petty Officer Johnson, a young avionic technician Rachel had mentored. "Everyone knows they're making a mistake." Rachel nodded once, maintaining her composure. "Take care of each other," she said simply. "That's what matters." On the flight deck, the wind whipped around her as she approached the rigid inflatable boat that would carry her away from the only life she had known for 12 years. Behind her, she could hear the whispered conversations of crew members who had gathered to witness her departure. Commander Webb stood near the island superstructure, his expression satisfied as he watched his victory unfold. Captain Harrison remained on the bridge, avoiding the scene he had allowed to happen. The executive officer, Commander Janet Pierce, stood with folded arms and a carefully neutral expression that couldn't hide her discomfort. As Rachel walked toward the boat, she passed a group of junior officers who had served under her command. Aviation Electronics Technician First Class Robert Taylor stepped forward, his voice carrying across the deck. "Lieutenant Commander Hayes," he called out, his voice formal but filled with emotion. "It's been an honor serving under your command, ma'am." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Other voices joined in, creating a chorus of respect that Webb's accusations couldn't silence. "Honor serving with you, ma'am. Best officer on the ship. Thank you for everything you taught us." Rachel felt her throat tighten, but she maintained her military bearing. She had been prepared for silence, for embarrassment, for the lonely walk of the disgraced. Instead, she was experiencing something unprecedented, a crew's refusal to accept injustice quietly. At the boat's edge, the pilot, Petty Officer Second Class Michael Torres, helped her down. She had worked with Torres during multiple operations, had trusted him with critical missions, had seen him grow from an uncertain sailor into a confident professional. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "did you know this would happen? Did you expect the crew to respond like this?" Rachel looked back at the faces watching her departure. These were professionals who understood excellence, who recognized integrity, who knew the difference between leadership and authority. They might not have the power to change her fate, but they had the courage to bear witness to injustice. As the boat pulled away from the carrier, Rachel kept her eyes forward, focused on the horizon where her uncertain future waited. She didn't turn around to see what was beginning to happen behind her, didn't witness the extraordinary events that were about to unfold across the entire carrier strike group. But throughout the fleet, something unprecedented was stirring. On the bridge of the USS Fitzgerald, Commander Lisa Rodriguez pulled out a personnel file she had kept for 6 months. A detailed report Rachel had written documenting a critical navigation error that could have compromised the entire formation. An error Rachel had caught and corrected quietly, without seeking credit or recognition. On the USS Ross, Captain James Murphy remembered the time Rachel had worked 18 straight hours recalibrating communication systems after a cyber attack, ensuring fleet coordination while others slept. He had never properly thanked her for that effort, had never acknowledged how her dedication had prevented a potential disaster. Across the strike group, officers were remembering moments when Rachel Hayes had quietly protected them, covered their mistakes, prevented their failures from becoming career-ending disasters. She had been the safety net that others relied on, the competence that others took for granted. In the communications center of the USS Porter, Chief Electronics Technician Amanda Foster discovered something interesting in the archived message. Logs. A series of reports Webb had filed about Rachel contained inconsistencies, contradictions, and timeline errors that suggested fabrication rather than fact. The truth was spreading through the fleet like wildfire, carried by secure communications and personal connections. Officers who had served with Rachel were sharing stories, comparing notes, and reaching the same conclusion. One of the Navy's finest officers was being destroyed by lies and incompetence. As the inflatable boat carried Rachel toward the supply vessel, she remained unaware of the storm building behind her. She focused on maintaining her dignity, on preserving her integrity, on leaving with the same professionalism that had defined her career. She had no idea that her quiet grace was about to inspire something unprecedented in naval history, that her walk across that deck would become a moment that revealed the difference between true leadership and hollow authority. The ocean stretched endlessly before her, but behind her, justice was beginning to stir in ways that would reshape everything. The first ship to break formation was the USS Fitzgerald, a guided missile destroyer positioned 2 nautical miles northwest of the carrier. Commander Rodriguez stood on the bridge, watching the inflatable boat carry Rachel Hayes toward the supply vessel, and made a decision that would cascade through the entire strike group. "Helm, come to course 270, she ordered quietly. "Ma'am, that will take us off our assigned heading," the officer of the deck replied uncertainly. Rodriguez looked at the tactical display, then back at the distant boat. "I know exactly what it will do. Execute the order." The course change was subtle but unmistakable, a 6-degree deviation that angled the destroyer's bow toward the departing inflatable. To casual observers, it might have appeared routine. To professional naval officers, it was a clear signal of something unprecedented. On the bridge of the USS Hannigan, the tactical officer noticed the movement immediately. "Sir, Fitzgerald is adjusting course. No operational reason apparent." Commander Webb, who had been savoring his victory, frowned at the tactical display. "Probably a navigation correction." monitor and continue current operations. But then the USS Ross followed suit, executing a precise turn to position its bow in the same direction. Then the USS Porter. Then the USS Carney. Within minutes, half the strike group was subtly adjusting course, creating a formation that had never been seen in decades of naval operations. In the carrier's communication center, Chief Radioman Patricia Kim frantically checked message logs, searching for the fleet-wide order that must have been issued. But there were no tactical commands, no operational directives, no weather advisories that would explain the coordinated movement. "Sir," she reported to the bridge, her voice confused and concerned, "I'm showing no communications that would account for the formation changes." Commander Pierce, the executive officer, studied the tactical display with growing alarm. She had served in the Navy for 18 years, had participated in dozens of operations, and had never seen anything like what was unfolding around them. "Get me the fleet commander," she ordered. But aboard the USS Constitution, the flagship of the strike group, Admiral Patricia Brennan was experiencing her own moment of reckoning. She had received secure communications from multiple ship commanders, each reporting the same thing. Lieutenant Commander Rachel Hayes was being unjustly removed from the USS Hannigan based on fabricated charges and falsified evidence. Admiral Brennan had served with Rachel's mentor, Captain Reynolds, and had heard nothing but praise for the young officer's competence and integrity. Now she was learning that one of the Navy's most promising officers was being destroyed by a systematic campaign of lies and manipulation. The Admiral picked up her secure phone and made a call that would change everything. On the USS Hannigan, Captain Harrison was summoned to the bridge with unusual urgency. Commander Pierce's face was grim as she handed him the tactical display. "Sir, we have a situation. 17 ships in our strike group have adjusted course. All are now oriented toward the departing inflatable boat. We're receiving no communications explaining the movement." Harrison studied the display, his experienced eyes immediately grasping the implications. This wasn't random navigation adjustment or tactical maneuvering. This was a coordinated statement being made by professional naval officers who had chosen to risk their careers rather than remain silent about injustice. "Sir," Pierce continued carefully, "we're now the only ship in the formation not facing Lieutenant Commander Hayes' direction." The words carried weight that transcended their tactical significance. The fleet was bearing witness to something unprecedented, using the language of naval positioning to communicate what official channels had failed to protect. Commander Webb appeared on the bridge, his face flushed with anger and confusion. "What the hell is happening out there? Why are our escorts breaking formation?" Harrison looked at Webb with new eyes, seeing not a competent officer but a source of embarrassment and shame. The fleet's unprecedented response was a direct judgment on his leadership, a clear statement that his decision to sacrifice Rachel Hayes had been recognized as the injustice it was. "They're not breaking formation, Commander," Harrison said quietly. "They're creating a new one, a formation that honors integrity over authority." Webb's face darkened. "Sir, this is insubordination. These officers are violating direct orders and compromising operational security." "Are they?" Harrison asked, his voice carrying dangerous undertones. "I see no violations of regulations, no breaches of security protocol. I see professional naval officers exercising their tactical discretion within established parameters." The bridge fell silent except for the hum of electronics and the distant sound of ocean waves. Every officer present understood they were witnessing something historic, a moment when the Navy's finest chose conscience over convenience, integrity over institutional protection. On the tactical display, the formation told a story that no official report would ever capture. 17 ships, hundreds of professional officers, thousands of enlisted personnel, all choosing to bear witness to injustice rather than remain silent. The USS Hannigan stood alone in the ocean, isolated not by distance but by the moral choices of its leadership. The fleet had spoken without saying a word, had rendered judgment without filing charges, had demonstrated that respect cannot be commanded but must be earned through actions that protect rather than persecute excellence. In the inflatable boat, Rachel Hayes maintained her forward focus, unaware that the entire Pacific Fleet was turning to honor her dignity and condemn the system that had failed to protect her. Her quiet grace was inspiring something unprecedented in naval history, a moment when the true meaning of leadership was revealed through the courage of those who chose to stand with integrity against injustice. The ocean itself was bearing witness, and the fleet would never be the same. The secure communication that arrived at Admiral Brennan's flagship changed everything. The message was brief, direct, and carried the authority of the highest levels of naval command. All charges against Lieutenant Commander Rachel Hayes are hereby dismissed. Full investigation reveals fabricated evidence and deliberate misconduct in the handling of this case. Officer to be immediately reinstated with full honors. Administrative review of USS Hannigan leadership to commence immediately. Admiral Brennan read the message twice, her experienced eyes taking in every word. The investigation had been swift and thorough, aided by the digital evidence Chief Foster had discovered and the testimony of multiple officers who had finally found the courage to speak the truth. She picked up the secure phone and placed a call to the USS Hannigan. On the carrier's bridge, Captain Harrison received the communication with a mixture of relief and dread. Relief that justice was finally being served, dread at the implications for his own career and the careers of those who had enabled Webb's vendetta. "All stop," he ordered quietly. "Signal the fleet to maintain current formation." The massive carrier slowed in the water, its nuclear engines reducing power as the ship prepared for what would become one of the most significant moments in recent naval history. Commander Webb, who had been watching the tactical display with growing alarm, suddenly understood that his carefully constructed web of lies was unraveling. The fleet's unprecedented response had drawn attention from the highest levels of command, had triggered investigations that revealed the truth he had worked so hard to conceal. "Sir," he began, his voice carrying a desperation that hadn't been there before, "I can explain the situation with Hayes. There may have been some miscommunication, some misunderstanding of the facts." "Stand down, Commander," Harrison ordered, his voice cutting through Webb's attempts at damage control. "You're relieved of all duties pending investigation." The words echoed across the bridge, carrying the weight of justice finally being served. Webb's face went pale as he realized that his campaign against Rachel Hayes had ultimately destroyed his own career. 20 minutes later, the same inflatable boat that had carried Rachel away from the carrier was racing back across the choppy Pacific waters. Petty Officer Torres, who had been as confused as everyone else about the sudden course change, now understood the significance of what was happening. "Ma'am," he said as the boat approached the carrier, "I've never seen anything like this. The entire fleet turning to face you, the Admiral getting involved, the truth finally coming out. It's like something out of a movie." Rachel looked back at the formation surrounding them, 17 ships positioned in a precise demonstration of professional solidarity. The sight took her breath away, not because of the tactical complexity, but because of what it represented. Hundreds of officers who had chosen to risk their careers rather than remain silent about injustice. "It's not about me," she said quietly. "It's about the principle. It's about protecting the kind of Navy we want to serve in." As the boat approached the carrier, Rachel could see crowds of personnel gathered on the flight deck. Chief Martinez stood at attention, his face beaming with pride and vindication. Lieutenant Walsh wiped tears from her eyes. Even sailors who barely knew Rachel had come to witness her return, understanding that they were part of something historically significant. On the bridge, Admiral Brennan waited with Captain Harrison and Commander Pierce. Webb had been escorted to quarters under guard, his career over, his reputation destroyed by the lies he had used to attack others. When Rachel stepped onto the flight deck, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Sailors and officers who had been forced to remain silent during her persecution now found their voices, creating a chorus of respect and support that echoed across the carrier. "Welcome back, ma'am. Justice served. Best officer in the fleet." Rachel maintained her military bearing, but couldn't hide the emotion in her eyes. She had left this ship in disgrace, branded as incompetent and dangerous. She was returning as a symbol of integrity, proof that truth eventually prevails even when power tries to suppress it. Admiral Brennan met her at the base of the island superstructure, her expression serious but respectful. "Lieutenant Commander Hayes, the Navy owes you an apology. Your record has been completely cleared, and you're being offered immediate promotion to full commander, along with assignment as executive officer of the USS Constitution." Rachel stood at attention, processing the magnitude of what was being offered. Executive officer of a flagship, a position of enormous responsibility and honor, a role that would put her on the fast track to command. "Thank you, Admiral. I accept." With honor. But the real victory wasn't in the promotion or the vindication. It was in the lesson that had been taught to every officer in the fleet. Competence matters more than politics. Integrity is more valuable than authority, and sometimes the most powerful protest is the quiet dignity of those who refuse to compromise their principles. As the sun set over the Pacific, the fleet began to resume normal formation. But the memory of this day would endure in the minds of every officer who had witnessed it. A reminder that the Navy's greatest strength lies not in its weapons or technology, but in the character of those who serve with honor. Commander Webb's career was over, his reputation destroyed by the same fabrications he had used to attack Rachel. Captain Harrison would face a career-ending investigation for his failure to protect a subordinate from persecution. The system that had failed to protect excellence would be reformed to prevent such injustices from happening again. And Rachel? Hayes would continue to serve with the same quiet competence that had made her a target, but now with the knowledge that excellence, when protected and honored, becomes the foundation upon which the entire Navy stands. 6 months later, Commander Rachel Hayes stood on the bridge of the USS Constitution, watching the sunrise paint the Pacific in shades of gold and amber. The flagship cut through moderate swells with the confidence of a vessel that had earned its place at the heart of the fleet. "Ma'am, morning reports," announced Lieutenant Commander Stephen Parker, the officer of the deck. Parker had requested transfer to the Constitution specifically to serve under Rachel's command, one of dozens of officers who had sought assignment to her new position. Rachel reviewed the reports with the same attention to detail that had defined her career. Every system status, every personnel update, every operational requirement received her careful consideration. But now her thoroughness was viewed as leadership rather than threat, competence rather than challenge. "Very well," she acknowledged. "Have the department heads report to the wardroom at 0800 for morning briefing." A transformation in Rachel's professional life had been dramatic. As executive officer of the Constitution, she held a position of enormous responsibility and influence. But more importantly, she commanded respect from officers throughout the fleet who had witnessed her quiet dignity during the darkest moment of her career. Admiral Brennan had made clear that Rachel's appointment was about more than career rehabilitation. It was about changing the culture of the Navy, about rewarding excellence instead of punishing it, about protecting officers who served with integrity rather than those who served with politics. The morning briefing proceeded with the efficient professionalism that had become the Constitution's trademark. Department heads reported on readiness status, training schedules, and operational requirements. But underlying the routine business was something deeper, a shared commitment to the principles that Rachel represented. "Supply situation is optimal," reported Lieutenant Commander Maria Santos, the logistics officer. "We're maintaining 97% readiness across all departments." "Outstanding," Rachel acknowledged. That level of performance reflects the dedication of everyone involved. It was a small comment, but it represented a leadership philosophy that had transformed the ship's culture. Rachel recognized excellence, credited those who achieved it, and created an environment where competence was celebrated rather than feared. After the briefing, Rachel walked through the ship, conducting the informal inspections that had become her trademark. She stopped to speak with petty officers about their families, discussed technical challenges with chief petty officers, and reviewed training progress with junior officers. In the computer center, she found Chief Electronics Technician Amanda Foster, the same officer who had discovered the evidence that led to Webb's downfall. Foster was training a group of younger sailors on advanced communication systems. "How is the training program progressing, Chief?" Foster smiled, her confidence obvious. "Excellent, ma'am. These sailors are learning fast, and they're excited about the opportunity to work on cutting-edge systems." Rachel watched the training session, noting the enthusiasm and dedication of the young sailors. This was what the Navy should be, a place where excellence was nurtured, where competence was rewarded, where integrity was protected. "Ma'am," Foster said quietly, "I wanted to thank you again for what you did. Standing up to Webb, accepting the consequences with dignity. It showed all of us what real leadership looks like." Rachel shook her head. "I didn't do anything special, Chief. I just tried to maintain my integrity under pressure." "That's exactly what made it special," Foster replied. "Anyone can maintain standards when it's easy. It takes real character to do it when it costs you everything." That afternoon, Rachel received a visitor in her quarters. Captain Patricia Reynolds, her former mentor, had flown out from Norfolk to check on Rachel's transition to command. "You look good," Patricia observed, settling into the chair across from Rachel's desk. "Command suits you." "It's challenging," Rachel admitted. "I'm learning that being an example is more complicated than I thought. People watch everything I do, interpret every decision through the lens of what happened with Webb." Patricia nodded knowingly. That's the burden of moral authority. Once you demonstrate it, people expect you to maintain it. But that's not a bad thing, Rachel. The Navy needs officers who understand that leadership is about character, not just rank. They talked for an hour about the challenges of command, the responsibility of setting examples, and the importance of maintaining the principles that has sustained Rachel through her darkest professional moment. "There's something else," Patricia said as she prepared to leave. "The promotion board is meeting next month. Your name is being considered for captain, with recommendation for command of your own ship." Rachel felt a surge of excitement mixed with trepidation. Ship command was the ultimate goal for any naval officer, the culmination of years of training and service. But it also meant leaving the Constitution, leaving the crew that had become her professional family. "I'm honored by the consideration," she said carefully. "You've earned it," Patricia replied. "What happened with Webb wasn't just about your personal vindication. It was about changing the culture of the Navy, about proving that excellence can survive even when it's under attack." As Patricia left, Rachel stood at her quarters porthole, looking out at the endless ocean. The fleet was conducting training exercises, ships maneuvering in complex formations that required precise coordination and mutual trust. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the persecution, the betrayal, the moment when she thought her career was over. Then the unprecedented response of the fleet, the investigation that revealed the truth, the vindication that had restored her reputation. But most importantly, she thought about the lesson that had been learned by everyone who witnessed those events. The Navy was stronger when it protected excellence, when it rewarded integrity, when it chose character over convenience. Webb's attempt to destroy her had ultimately strengthened the institution he had tried to corrupt. His downfall had become a cautionary tale, a reminder that the Navy's greatest strength lay not in its weapons or technology, but in the character of those who served with honor. As the sun set over the Pacific, Rachel Hayes prepared for whatever challenges lay ahead, secure in the knowledge that she had earned her position through competence rather than politics, integrity rather than compromise. The ocean stretched endlessly before her, full of possibilities and opportunities to serve the Navy that had ultimately chosen to protect rather than persecute excellence. And somewhere in the vast Pacific, other young officers were learning that integrity was not just valued but protected, that excellence was not just welcomed but defended. 1 year later, Captain Rachel Hayes stood on the bridge of her own command. The USS Vigilant, a newly commissioned guided missile destroyer that represented the newest generation of naval technology. The promotion ceremony had been attended by officers from across the Pacific Fleet, many of whom had served witness to her journey from persecution to vindication. Admiral Brennan had personally presented her with the fourth stripe, speaking words that would be remembered throughout the Navy. Captain Hayes represents the finest traditions of naval service. Her commitment to excellence, integrity under pressure, and unwavering dedication to her people exemplify the leadership our Navy requires. But the real measure of Rachel's impact wasn't found in ceremonies or promotions. It was visible in the culture change that had rippled through the entire fleet following the events aboard the USS Hannigan. "Captain, we have a secure communication from Fleet Headquarters," announced her communications officer, Lieutenant Commander David Kim. Priority message regarding the new officer evaluation protocols. Rachel reviewed the message with satisfaction. The Navy had implemented sweeping changes to how officers were evaluated, promoted, and protected from retaliation. The Hayes Protocols, as they had become known throughout the service, established clear procedures for investigating misconduct, allegations, protecting whistleblowers, and ensuring that competence was rewarded rather than punished. Commander Marcus Webb had been court-martialed and dismissed from the service in disgrace. His systematic campaign against Rachel had been revealed in detail during the proceedings, serving as a cautionary tale about the abuse of authority. Captain Harrison had been forced into early retirement, his failure to protect the subordinate from persecution marking the end of his naval career. But more importantly, dozens of young officers had been inspired by Rachel's example to report misconduct, challenge unethical orders, and maintain their integrity even when it was difficult. The Navy was becoming a place where excellence was protected rather than persecuted. "Ma'am," called Chief Petty Officer Robert Taylor, who had followed Rachel from the Hannigan to the Constitution and now to the Vigilant. "The new officers are reporting aboard. Shall I have them assemble for orientation?" Rachel smiled, remembering her own early days as a junior officer, uncertain and eager to prove herself. "Have them report to the wardroom in 30 minutes, Chief. I want to meet each one personally." The group of ensigns and junior lieutenants who assembled in the wardroom represented the Navy's future. They were bright, eager, and committed to serving their country with honor. But Rachel knew they would face challenges and temptations that could derail their careers if they weren't properly prepared. "Welcome aboard the USS Vigilant," she began, her voice carrying the authority of hard-won experience. "You're joining not just a ship, but a tradition of excellence that has been earned through the dedication and sacrifice of those who served before you." She looked at each young face, seeing herself as she had been years earlier, determined, idealistic, and perhaps naive about the challenges ahead. "I want to share something with you about integrity," she continued. It's not just about following rules or avoiding corruption. It's about having the courage to do what's right even when it's difficult, even when it costs you personally, even when no one is watching. She told them about her journey, about the persecution she had faced, about the moment when her career seemed over. But more importantly, she told them about the lesson she had learned, that excellence protected and nurtured becomes the foundation upon which the entire Navy stands. There will be times when you'll be tempted to compromise, to take shortcuts, to remain silent when you should speak up, she said. In those moments, remember that your integrity is more valuable than any promotion, more important than any assignment, more lasting than any temporary advantage. Lieutenant Jennifer Walsh, who had served with Rachel since their time together on the Hannigan and was now the Vigilance Operations Officer, watched the orientation with pride. She had seen firsthand how Rachel's leadership style transformed units, how her commitment to excellence inspired others to exceed their own expectations. After the orientation, Rachel walked through her ship, conducting the personal inspections that had become her trademark. The Vigilant was a marvel of modern naval engineering, equipped with the most advanced weapons and sensors available. But its true strength lay in its crew, in the professionals who operated its systems and carried out its mission. In the communications center, she found Petty Officer First Class Amanda Chun working on a complex maintenance procedure. Chen had requested transfer to the Vigilant, specifically to serve under Rachel's command, drawn by the reputation for professional excellence that followed her throughout the fleet. How are the new systems working out, Petty Officer Chen? Outstanding, ma'am. The upgrades are performing beyond specifications, and the crew is adapting quickly to the new procedures. Rachel nodded, noting the pride in Chun's voice. This was what the Navy should be. Professionals taking ownership of their responsibilities, exceeding standards rather than merely meeting them, serving with pride rather than merely following orders. That evening, Rachel stood on the bridge wing, watching the sun set over the Pacific. The Vigilant was part of a carrier strike group conducting training exercises, ships maneuvering in complex formations that required precise coordination and mutual trust. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the years of quiet service, the sudden persecution, the moment when her career seemed destroyed, the unprecedented response of the fleet, and the vindication that had restored not just her reputation, but her faith in the institution she served. Her secure phone buzzed with an incoming message. It was from Admiral Brennan, now serving as Chief of Naval Operations, the highest position in the Navy. Rachel, the promotion board has approved your recommendation for Rear Admiral. Congratulations on a well-deserved advancement. The Navy needs leaders who understand that our greatest strength lies not in our technology, but in our character. Rachel read the message twice, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was being offered. Flag rank. The opportunity to shape naval policy, the chance to influence the culture of the entire service. But more than personal achievement, the promotion represented validation of the principles she had never compromised. That excellence matters more than politics. That integrity is more valuable than convenience. That the Navy's true strength lies in the character of those who serve with honor. As stars appeared in the darkening sky, Rachel Hayes looked out at the vast ocean that had been her home for so many years. Somewhere in that darkness, young officers were learning the same lessons she had learned, facing the same challenges she had faced, making the same choices between convenience and character. The Navy was stronger because of what had happened. Aboard the USS Hannigan, Webb's attempt to destroy excellence had ultimately strengthened the institution he had tried to corrupt. His downfall had become a reminder that the service's greatest victories were not won through superior firepower, but through superior character. The fleet had spoken without saying a word, had rendered judgment without filing charges, had demonstrated that respect cannot be commanded, but must be earned through actions that protect rather than persecute excellence. And in wardrooms and ready rooms throughout the Pacific Fleet, young officers were learning that integrity was not just valued but protected, that excellence was not just welcomed but defended, that the Navy's future depended not on its weapons or technology, but on the character of those who chose to serve with honor. The ocean stretched endlessly before them all, full of challenges and opportunities, storms and calms, defeats and victories. But through it all, the lesson of Lieutenant Commander Rachel Hayes would endure, that sometimes the most powerful protest is the quiet dignity of those who refuse to compromise their principles, and that real leadership is not about the power to punish, but about the wisdom to protect those who serve with honor. The waves rolled on, carrying that lesson across the vast Pacific, where it would inspire generations of naval officers to choose character over convenience, integrity over expediency, and honor over everything else. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.